Good morning, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. It's a cold morning, so I also hope you're all keeping warm from wherever you are. And we want to thank you for bracing this morning and sacrificing your time to join us. We'll just give a few minutes to have the rest join us, and then we can start at 9:05. Excited to have a very fruitful conversation. Awesome. The music is off. Hope you enjoyed that, a little warm up. I hope you're also enjoying your cup of coffee or tea, whichever is your favorite this morning. And once again, we want to thank you for bracing this day and joining us once again for an exciting conversation. It is a lot of sacrifice, and this means that we are on the same boat in this case, and that you're one of our most loyal followers, because whatever happens, you will join us. We hope not to keep you long so that we release you for the rest of the day and the rest of the weekend. And therefore, without further ado, allow me to introduce our very able hosts, Wandera Kweyu, to take us through today's session. We hope for it to be interactive. And so if you have any question, feel free to raise your hand or put it on the chat or on the Q&A section. And also feel free to interact with us on our social media pages, and that is on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram, using the hashtag Managing Redundancies and Conversations with Wandy. We hope you enjoy as much as we do, and by the end of it, we hope that you take as much as you intended to. So, Wandera Kweyu, karibu sana.
Justin, a very able coordinator, and thank you very much to all the people that have joined us. In case this is your first time attending our Conversations with Wandy talk, we are very delighted to have you here. And if this is you attending again and again, we're very grateful for your time, and for every person for braving this cold morning to be able to join us. We really thank you and enjoy your presence. My name is Wandera Kweyu, but everybody that knows me calls me Wandy, and I'm very excited to be taking you through the processes of how we work around redundancies in Kenya. As Justin has said, we are hoping for a very interactive session. If you have any questions whatsoever, you can always put them on the question and answer session of this presentation. And you can also raise your hand, and should time allow, Justin will be able to get in touch and get you to ask your question live. So if we could just go straight into it and just get a good understanding on exactly what are redundancies. Many a times when we deal with employment, there is a good confusion between a voluntary termination and an involuntary termination, and it gets even more technical when you say an involuntary termination can be a redundancy or a termination with cause. Now, let me just explain that in a very simple manner. When you join employment, you can leave willingly. That is through resignation, and that is what we call voluntary termination of employment. Or you can leave unwillingly. So unwilling termination of employment is what we call involuntary termination of employment. Redundancies are part of involuntary termination of employment. But in the whole space of involuntary termination of employment, there is the part that talks about where the fault is on somebody, and then the fault is on not the employee. Now, one of the involuntary terminations, which we call the terminations with cause, 9 out of 10, the reason is a recognizable and allowable reason within law that causes one to be terminated from employment. That's why we call it involuntary termination with cause. So the involuntary termination with cause can be maybe through a disciplinary process where you did something according to the disciplinary rules of your organization, you were processed out. A redundancy, on the other hand, as much as it is an involuntary termination, the fault is never at the employee's side. It is always instigated by the employer. So that is the first and biggest distinction when we are dealing with redundancies. Redundancies are done at no fault of the employee. However, it is the employer that instigates a redundancy, and a redundancy always ends up in the loss of employment. So the shorter way of looking at it is saying, the easier way of looking at it is saying that a redundancy occurs when a person unwillingly loses their job, not out of their own fault, but at the instigation of an employer. Now, these are many words that we have said, but if you could just remember it properly, if you have done something that is recognized as a dismissible offense within the law and within internal policies of the organization that you work with, there can be a process that is gone through where a fair hearing is given, your reasons are explained, you're given a chance to explain yourself and what it is that you did to get to that situation. A decision is taken, you're given a right to appeal, and then a dismissal occurs. That is a termination with cause, and that is not a redundancy. A redundancy, on the other hand, is when you still lose your job. You didn't intend to lose your job, but you didn't do anything to find yourself in that spot. And it is the employer that tells you, unfortunately, for no fault of your own, you will be losing your job through redundancy. I hope that is very clear when we talk about what is a redundancy. So it's the involuntary loss of an employment at the instigation of an employer at no fault of the employee. I hope that is clear so that when we go into the next slide, we can start speaking about the ingredients that make a redundancy. I like using the word ingredients because, when we think about it this way, think about it like a meal. When you prepare a meal, if you're Kenyan and you're here, you do realize that if you're going to make ugali, for instance, if you don't put in the maize flour, you're not going to have ugali at the end of the day. This is why a redundancy has ingredients. There are things that have to occur for this redundancy to be considered legal, right? So you have to remember consistently, these are the things that must have gone, you must have put in your basket for you to say that you have a legally sound redundancy in hand, right? So the first thing you need to remember is that redundancy in employment is in relation to a position. Quite a number of people out here believe that redundancy is to a person. No, redundancy is to a position. It's just that the loss of employment then results to the effect is felt by the position holder. But the position is the one that is declared redundant. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to be very clear about that distinction because the clarity in this distinction helps us to be able to navigate the process of redundancy very simply. When you say that a position is redundant, it means that it is no longer needed. This is why it is removed from a business. Yes, the position holder will eventually end up losing their job because of this removal, but the redundancy occurs to the position. So that when you're writing a letter of redundancy to a position holder, you're saying your position has been declared redundant, and consequently, this will result in the loss of your employment, but the position is the one that has been declared redundant. We really need to be familiar with that particular ingredient. Redundancy is to a position and not to a person. Now, the reasons for redundancy are normally business related. You can't just wake up and say, tomorrow I'm going to declare a redundancy. It doesn't work like that. There are scenarios and situations that are considered very clearly when we're dealing with redundancies, and they have to be business change related. Now, a business can change in three major ways. One, a business can have a commercial redirection, where it says, for instance, we were making money from, let's say, 3 business lines. We were selling, let's say we were selling this particular good here, and then this other one, and this other one, and this were our revenue stream. And then the business can sit down and say, you know what, we don't need to sell this product anymore. So we are going to change the redirect. We are going to redirect the commercial viability of this business by stopping this business line. So then you have 2 business lines. Then the question remains then, what happens to this business line? That's how we keep saying again, the redundancy is to the positions. So the positions that are there within this business line will be declared redundant. Consequently, the position holders will lose their employment through redundancy, but it is the positions that are declared redundant. This is one of the reasons that a business can declare a redundancy when it redirects itself commercially. What is common currently is the economic downturn. COVID has done a number on quite a number of business, and there's been a lot of realities and heavy commercial changes that have occurred within the market space. You've seen businesses lose huge revenue streams, and some businesses actually being obliterated altogether. One of the things that is being discussed a lot within the HR departments is, do we come back to work or do we work from home? But one of the things that is actually very interesting, that is a big discussion that is ongoing globally, is what happens to the business owners that had invested severely into creating this office space that you now want to no longer use. What's going to happen to all these skyscrapers? Are we just going to have buildings all over the place that are empty? And what is going to happen to this kind of people who are working in this kind of establishments? And you notice that there are some business owners who their work is to rent space are actually declaring redundancies because of the difficulty in the economic times currently. So economic downtimes are some of the big reasons as to why businesses end up declaring redundancies. The other way a business change can result in a redundancy is if the redirection of the business and there's a change in strategy to just, make the business a little bit more viable. Now, for instance, you can notice that there can be some efficiencies that are put into a business that end up either merging roles or completely removing other roles within the business, and therefore some roles then end up becoming redundant, especially those roles that have been merged. You notice, like, if there was a role that was just a finance role, and then maybe you had a big organization, for instance, and you had a financial accountant, you had a management accountant, then you had a cost accountant, and then you notice that a business puts in some efficiencies and says, we're just going to get a generalist and more experienced person to become a finance manager and run this business in this area. Excuse me. In these scenarios, you find these reorganizations, these strategy changes may lead some positions to be declared redundant, and consequently, the owners, the position holders here, will lose their jobs owing to redundancies. Now, the third ingredient that you need to remember consistently is that the processes that are required to be followed, the steps that are required to be followed in a redundancy are defined in law. Now, this is something that I need us, ladies and gentlemen, to really take keen notice of. These processes are defined in law. Yes, you are allowed by the Kenyan laws to enhance what is already listed in the laws, but you're not allowed to go below what the laws has given. This is because our laws take a minimalist approach where they say at a bare minimum, this has to be done. You notice this kind of minimalist approach in other laws, like for instance, they tell you a minimum of 21 days of leave, a minimum of 7 days full pay and 7 days half pay when it comes to sick off. So essentially what they're saying is that an employer is not allowed to do anything below the minimum. However, nothing stops you as an employer to do things that are above the minimum, the minimum, or give enhanced provisions from the minimum. We are going to focus in this discussion on those bare minimum steps that are defined for a redundancy in law. So if you have questions where your provisions are enhanced, we can discuss, but the thing that I need us to remember is that at this particular point, we are going to discuss those minimum provisions that are required within the law. So just to recap once more, a redundancy occurs at when there is an involuntary loss of job at no fault of the employee through the instigation of an employer, and some ingredients have to be present for it to be considered a redundancy, and those ingredients are simple. The redundancy is to the position. The reasons for the redundancy are related to changes that have occurred in the business, and that a clear steps that have been outlined in law have been followed. Now, from here, let's go in and discuss which are these minimal steps that are required within the law. Thing number one, when you declare a redundancy, you must make information both to your staff and to the Ministry of Labor or the Labor Office. Before, we used to call it the Ministry of Labor. Right now, it is the Labor Office in Kenya. It's very important for us to understand what kind of notices these are. Now, there are some legal decided cases that have been very particular that the notices must be to. I want to talk a little bit about why you need to make these two notices and where the confusion was coming on before when it came to the number of notices. How the law is worded currently in Section 40 of the Employment Act, it says very clearly that if your staff is a member of a union, you need to send a notice to the Ministry of Labor and a copy of the same to the union and to the staff to declare your intention to declare redundancy. Please note that this first notice is that one of intent to declare a redundancy. We need to be very clear, and even how we are wording these letters, they need to say we intend to declare a redundancy. Before, quite a number of individuals were saying, since none of my employees is a member of a union, I don't need to give this notice. Now, decided cases have shown that the intention behind this notice is to be able to get to a space where you can have consultations that can help you, especially to prepare the people whose positions will be affected by these redundancies, to have a discussion and understand, to honestly consider the available options that are there for you to have a minimalized effect of your redundancy, and to give consultation and consultative processes within the tripartite relationship of an employment that is between the employer, the employee, and the union to continue before a final decision is reached. The reason why courts have been very clear that this notice has to be given even though you don't have, one of your staff is not a union member, is the simplicity of the fact that simply because they are unrepresented when it comes to a tripartite relationship doesn't mean that they are precluded from a fair labor practice of having conversations before they involuntarily lose their jobs. So this is why this notice currently is being considered compulsory. So whether or not your staff are members of a union, whether or not the union that you're dealing with is recognized within your institution, you are highly advised, and decided cases have shown that you in fact should send this notice to the office of the labor office, to your staff. And if you don't have a union, to your staff and the Office of Labor. If you have a union, to your staff, to the Office of Labor, and to a copy to the union. Now, this notice is supposed to stay for a minimum of 30 days. If your internal regulations put it at more, then go with the enhanced provision. If you have an active consent to bargaining agreement and it gives a more enhanced position, go with the enhanced position. However, you cannot give a notice to the Ministry of Labor that is 27 days. It must be at a minimum 30 days. Now, what happens for these 30 days? These 30 days, these original 30 days where you give your intention to declare a redundancy, these 30 days cannot be paid off. What does that actually then mean? It simply means you cannot issue this notice and then tomorrow pay it in lieu for your staff. This notice must be stayed. The key word is it must be stayed. The reason this notice is stayed is the simplicity of the fact that this is the time you're having consultative processes between yourselves, your employees, and in the situations that allows your labor unions, so that you can find a more agreeable and a less brutal result rather than a redundancy. So this notice of intent, whether there is a union or not, is good practice and is proving consistently compulsory. This notice must be of a minimum of 30 days, and this notice cannot be paid off. Then there is a second notice. The second notice is now the notice that actually declares a redundancy. So you say, 30 days ago, we had an intention to declare a redundancy, and you say, okay, I'm citing economic downtimes, and I'm saying, yes, this and this and this has occurred, and we think we have the intent to declare a redundancy. Then after those 30 days, you write back to the Ministry of Labor and say, in fact, after the 30 days has gone by and after we have talked through these processes, we realize that we are indeed going to declare a redundancy. In this notice, the words that change very specifically is that it moves from intention to declare a redundancy, and this is declaration of a redundancy. So now you're telling the Ministry of Labor that we conversations with Wandy are declaring a position. We are declaring a position redundant, or we are declaring several positions redundant. And from this day, this redundancy is going to happen, right? This notice should be given for 30 days. This notice should be given to the Ministry of Labor or to the Office of Labor. Sorry, I'm old school. I keep calling it the Ministry, to the Office of Labor. It should be given to your staff and the staff directly that is affected, and to a copy to a union in the event that there is a union that is involved in your organization, right? So these notices, the two notices are distinctly different. One is of an intention to declare redundancy, and the second one is the declaration of redundancy. The second difference between these notices occurs when one notice must be stayed. This is the notice to declare and the intention to declare. And the reason behind this I have explained and said, this is to allow consultative processes to occur, meaningful consultative processes. The second one, because we already know that the redundancy is going to occur, this notice can be paid off. So you can issue the notice and the staff can opt to be paid off. Or absolutely the staff can decide, I will get this notice and I will stay the 30 days. Or the organization can exercise its right to say then that, yes, we are giving you the 30-day notice. Your last working day then is supposed to be, let's say, 30th May, but we are going to pay you off these days so that your last working days becomes the 1st of May. Josephine, I don't know if there is any question that I can take right now before we go into the next step.
Great progress, Wandy. There is no question, but there's only a comment from Abdul Karim. He says, hello to all. Abdul Karim Othiambo, AIHRM, CHRP student, following from Migori County. Kindly share the slides at the end of the session. Thank you. Yes, we will share the slides to all your emails, to each one of you. And you can also follow the conversation via our social media pages. On the, we have live updates, so there you have. However, we have a hand raised, and that is from Elizabeth Busiene. Are you able to take that, Wandy? Can I allow them to talk? All right.
Yes, please.
Elizabeth, go ahead.
Good morning.
Good morning, Elizabeth.
So now, Wandy, I was declared redundant, and I was given the first letter where it was showing the intent, and I was paid for that month. But now, on the second letter, I wasn't paid because that was they said the notice they were giving me was the one for intent, and on my last day, that 1 month is what I was paid as notice. On the second letter, my dues were only calculated as last leave days earned and days worked for that month and service pay. But now, from your conversation, does it mean that I should have been paid notice as well, or?
I am saying clearly that there are some employers that have been looking because they don't have a union, and they are saying currently that because we don't have a union, the notice of intent doesn't need to be sent. So they only go with the second notice, which is the notice to declare redundancy. Now, decided cases and common practice and best practice has been insisting consistently that you need to send both these notices, whether or not a person is a member of a trade union. There is a lot of heavy decided cases that show that this is the way to go. Best practice also shows that this is the way to go. However, there are some employers that do not do this. So again, Elizabeth, I am not exactly sure of what your context is, but what I am stating
is in terms of payment, because you've said the first one you should pay not, you shouldn't buy out the notice.
No, you should not.
You should not, yeah.
Yes, that is the process.
Okay, and when you're declaring that person redundant, should you pay notice or just leave days, service, and days worked.
I will get into the details of calculating of the benefits, but essentially you should.
Oh, really? Okay. That's fine. Thank you.
All righty then. Now, if we can go to
question and discussion there. Let me just read one more question related to that. From Mercy when you came. Hi, I'm Mercy, following from Nairobi County. I proceeded for maternity leave, and the day I resumed, I was issued with a redundancy letter. No communication was done to me while on maternity leave. Was the process followed?
As we are going to continue going through the processes, you will realize that there was a procedural flaw in what has happened to you. But what I advise is understand exactly what it is that I am speaking about today, and then decide whether or not you have an option to exercise. But what I can say for sure is the more we keep talking, you will notice that there have been flaws that have gone on in the process that occurred to you, and I'm very sorry for that.
All right, we continue.
Alrighty then. So we've spoken about the first step, which are the notices that are supposed to be given. So there is one notice that is given to the Ministry of Labor of the intention to declare the redundancy. Then there is this notice has 30 days. This notice should go to the employees. It should go to the Office of Labor, and it should also go to trade unions in the event that trade unions exist in your organization. This notice cannot be served. It has to be for a minimum of 30 days. And the purpose of this is to allow for conversations to go on. The second notice is given again to the Ministry of Labor, to the person affected by the redundancy, and a copy to the trade unions in the event that there are trade unions in the workspace. It should again be for a minimum of 30 days, and this notice is now the declaration of the redundancy, and this notice can be paid off in lieu. Now let's get into consultations. What does it mean to consult during a process of redundancy? So there is 3 ways of consulting and 3 best practice that every employer in here or employer representative in here should be able to be fully aware of as we are continuing, right? Consultations before substantively declaring a redundancy. Now, this is where you see my first notice makes sense. Because when you send out this notice to the Office of Labor, you're saying, we have an intention to declare redundancy because of, let's say, economic downtimes. So we want to think through it and see what exactly does this mean for this business? What other options are available for us before we actually substantively declare this redundancy? This is the time when, during these 30 days that are not supposed to be paid off, you notice that employers will engage with employees and tell them that, yes, this is how the business has been performing. This is how we've lost income, or this is a revenue stream that is not there. We are unable to sustain, and this is the intention that we have to help the business survive. We are going to maybe create some efficiencies here and there by removing the following positions. Staff are allowed to ask questions. You're allowed to give other ways of getting staff to cope with this. If there is a union that is available, that then it needs to come in and have conversations and work through the representation of their members. This is why these notices are not supposed to be paid off. Because when it's paid off, you deprive the employee, you deprive the union, you deprive the process, the fairness of it being consultative and meaningfully so. This is the first consultation that is held. Immediately after the first notice of intent is sent, a consultation is had before a substantive redundancy is declared. Now, during these consultations, there is another second consultation that pops up. This is a consultation that really centers around all the other mitigations that are available to reduce the effect of that redundancy. Now, this is very important because you do realize that jobs do form the backbone of our economy. When people are not working, the economy of a nation actually suffers. When redundancies, especially those ones of a large nature, are being they're being considered, it is important to look at what else is available to make sure that the effect of the redundancy is not felt so heavily on the people. So this is how you start seeing some organizations will think through some creative ways, like having, let's say, alternative ways of job loss, like let's say voluntary early retirement instead, where you say to the people that are closer to the age of retirement, you say, okay, you're 58, our retirement age is 60. Would you consider going early? Okay. Now, these kind of things, they help, because then the person that would the position that would have been declared redundant, 9 out of 10, and when I'm talking about the selection process, you'll be able to understand why, the person that would be targeted by this redundancy is not the person that is just about to retire. But if you think about it critically and fairly, if a person, for instance, has just 6 months to hit retirement, it makes sense to have a conversation with this person, because the effect of that redundancy or that retirement to that person is one that is already has been considered, contemplated for a long time. And this person might be seeing it very differently from when you go to that young individual who has just started the job and say, now you can no longer have a job. So these consultations on mitigating circumstances that can reduce the effect of the redundancy need to be had. Sometimes these consultations can be around issues like, maybe let's get pay cuts, or maybe let's change on how we are working with our overtime policy. Let's see if there is a benefit that is currently existing that can be removed. I mean, what else can we do to make sure that the effect of this redundancy is felt less to the organization, right? And to the people that it is eventually going to affect. Other mitigating ways could be, if a part of the business is closing and the other part of the business is open, would the business be open to consider, and would the people that are affected by this redundancy be open to consider to want to move into these other open positions in the business that is already functioning, right? So those are just consultations that can help people to be able to not, give so many people a huge effect when it comes to redundancies. Now, the last consultation is the consultation that is done after substantively a redundancy has now been declared. Now we're saying we considered, then we came up with these positions, then from these positions, we got 7 people to go on early retirement, we got 3 other people to be redeployed in the business the way this one was, or we actually took 3 pay cuts and therefore we ended up only declaring 2 people redundant. So now, these 2 people, after this redundancy has been declared, this consultation is centrally focused on what happens then, because my position has been declared redundant. What benefits are available to me? What am I going to do next? How am I going to behave in the organization? I have questions. Is there any support that the business can give me? And this is where we say, legally, do things extra that can make you human. If you have attended a conversations with Wandy before, or you've interacted with me before, one of the biggest principles that I put out there is that we are first human beings, then we are employees. It is important at this stage to give people alternative ways of dealing with this very shocking news in a humane manner. This is where you find processes where there's outplacement conversations that are hard. You find organizations, some of them are being very lenient, where they're telling people, because your position has been affected through this redundancy, maybe we can give you an hour or 2 every single day for you to go and search for a job elsewhere. Or there is many other things that can be considered to make this less heavy on that person. Also, again, this is a process where people sit, they discuss, and they get to understand what happens to them after they have been substantively declared redundant. So let me just recap in case somebody has just joined. A redundancy is the involuntary loss of employment at no fault of the employee, at the instigation of an employer, that results to the loss of employment, right? Now, a redundancy is to the position. A redundancy occurs from reasons that require a change in the business. The change in the business can be economically related, commercially redirected, or strategically enabled in changes that are occurring. The steps to follow in a redundancy are clearly defined by law on the minimalistic standards that need to be followed. There is no harm whatsoever if an employer chooses to enhance those said provisions. The first step in declaring a redundancy is to issue notices. A notice of intent has to be sent to the Ministry of Labour. This notice should be a minimum of 30 days. It should be given a copy to all the employees in the organization that is affected and a copy to the union in the event that a union is in existence. This notice cannot be paid off. It must be served. The second notice is the one that declares a substantial redundancy. It should be issued to the Office of Labour, a copy to the affected employee, and a copy to a trade union should a trade union be in existence. This notice should be at a minimum of 30 days. It can be paid or it can be stayed. The second process is to consult. Please have meaningful consultations with your staff. This consultation should be before substantively declaring a redundancy, mitigations on reducing the effects of redundancy, and conversations on what happens to a person after they have been declared redundant. Before we go into the third step, Josephine, do we have questions that we can answer?
We have some great questions, and one is on the Q&A session from Angela Mwenderani, and she's asking, should consultancy be held even for its only one position being declared redundant?
Absolutely. Absolutely, because sometimes you as a business might be seeing that this is the only solution, and maybe this guy, this position that is being declared redundant, maybe this person honestly would prefer, instead of declaring me redundant, I've seen another position that is open in another area of the business, why don't I apply for it? I mean, you have to be able to give that opportunity to occur. That's why I said consultations need to be meaningful. They're not just a sham to tick a box. Just have a meaningful conversation. You never really know. You can learn something or end up reducing the effect of just that one redundancy.
Good. We also have a question from the chat by Noel Tanyasis. The question is, good morning. On the selection process, what if staff with medical conditions are singled out despite good productivity?
Now, our next slide is actually going to deal with this extensively. So I think let's use that particular slide to talk about and answer this question.
Awesome. Let's continue.
Alrighty then. So the third step. So we've talked about the first step, which is the notices. The second step, which is a consultation. Now the third step is the selection of the redundant positions. Now, is there a possibility that you don't know which positions you're going to declare redundant? Yes, that possibility exists consistently. Now, the bigger question to ask here consistently is, when you have the intention to declare redundancy, sometimes it is likely that you don't know the extent of the said redundancy. This is why you issue your first notice, because you're saying, I have the intention to declare a redundancy. So then you go ahead and say, with this intention, we have discussed, had consultations, and we think the intent of this redundancy is going to be in these 9 positions, right? Then you declare a substantive redundancy. Before you do this, during the consultation processes, it is important for an organization to always adopt and communicate a selection criteria. The beauty of these very, very meaningful consultations is that you can always utilize this time to discuss this. Now, you can say very clearly that because the business is changing and is stopping, say, business line Y, obviously all the positions in business line Y will become redundant. But if that's not the case, you can say, yes, we are not stopping a business line, but we are going to do efficiency by selecting this process, by going through this process to select the roles. So you can say maybe in finance, the financial accountant's position has been declared redundant because it has been merged into a new role that now we are just calling senior finance manager, who will now do cost accounting, management accounting, and financial reporting. Now you see that's something that makes sense. When you have gone through these processes, you selected and said, this is how we are going to select, this is what we are adopting, and this is how we are going to do it. You communicate this to your staff. Legally, there is a principle known as first in, last out. This is a principle recognized by law that states the person who came into the organization first, as in the longer serving employees, stay in the organization longer. So if you came in recently, the higher the chances of your position being affected by a redundancy. I will take that again. First in, last out. But the position, I know this principle has been said very clearly. It's known as LIFO. If you hear it, how they put it legally, when you're speaking legally, it's just last in, first out principle. That's why you will hear about LIFO. That's what it means. But the principle is really simple. The people who stayed longer in an organization are generally protected from a redundancy. And it is expected that the people who have stayed shorter will be the first people who will be considered first within a redundancy for obvious reasons, right? One is a redundancy occurs mainly because a business is going through difficult economic times. Because of the payment structure of a redundancy, it makes a lot of sense that you remove the people that came in last because it is a more economically friendly position to take for the business. So if it is indeed true that your business is saying, we don't have money, then it is quite strange that then they would go and declare redundant the people who have been in the organization for eons and eons that would end up costing the organization even more money. Then a court, then a reasonable man would wonder, could you then not just let people stay in the organization then? All right. So this is where the principle of last in, first out comes a lot. Another principle that has been considered during the declaration, the selection of redundancy is in the event that there is more than one person that is considered in a role. And this principle of last in, first out has already been considered. But then when we look back at skill, ability, and reliability of our position holder, it makes sense then that you could find a person that has stayed longer in an organization being declared redundant over that person whose skill, whose ability, and whose reliability is differently abled from the other longer serving employee. Now, it is not necessary for you to have a selection criterion when the position you have declared redundant has only one position holder. Because if it has one position holder, then you don't need to have a criteria to select, all right? But when the positions that you have declared redundant have more than one position holder, you need to be able to adopt a selection criteria and communicate the selection criteria to the people that are around you within the business. I hope I am very clear at this particular point. I just want to recap from where we were to where we are right now. That one, a redundancy occurs at the instigation of the employer, not at any fault of the employee, and it results in the loss of unemployment. Now, when a redundancy occurs, there are three things that form this redundancy. One is that it is a position that is declared redundant and not a position holder. The position holder's loss of employment is a consequence of their position being declared redundant. Two, there are some reasons that are considered normal and accepted when it comes to the declaration of redundancies. These reasons include changes in business. They can be influenced by economic changes. They can be influenced by commercial redirections. They can be influenced by strategy changes. The third thing is that businesses, after they've gone through all of this process, there is standard steps that are set in the law that must be followed. The law gives you the minimalist steps that you must follow, but nothing actually prevents you from enhancing those processes. We went into discussing the steps, and the first step is to, one, send out your notices. First notice to the Ministry of Labor should be 30 days in copy to all staff and the trade union, should the trade union be in existence. This notice is of your intention to declare a redundancy. This notice cannot be paid off, and it is after this notice is given that you start consultative processes. The second notice is the substantive declaration of redundancy. This notice goes out to the person affected, to the Ministry of Labor, to the Office of Labor, and to the trade unions. This notice must be a minimum of 30 days and it can be paid off unlike the first notice. The second step is on consultation. You have to consult with your employees and your union, should your case be like that, constructively and also meaningfully, to make sure that, one, your intention to declare redundancy is considered very well, you have created an opportunity where mitigation factors have been put in place, and lastly, you have had meaningful conversations and consultations with the people who have been declared redundant. The third step is to adopt and communicate the selection criteria, where you need one, of the people that will now be declared redundant. Josephine, I don't know if at this point I have questions that I can take.
Actually, it's quite a conversation going on the chat and I'm loving it. Linda Ngolo is asking, in the first letter of intent for redundancy, do you give the actual date when the role will be officially declared redundant? Let's say if I do the letter in 1st May, do I say that the role will be declared redundant by 30th June, or I just indicate 30 days notice for the intention? And Coach Richie, I see you responding and saying, because of counting, yes, Linda. And then Linda also asked first 30 or 60 days.
Okay, let me take that before
check it out, and then we see how the conversation goes. Yes.
First things first, an intention to declare redundancy should not already have the positions that are going to be declared redundant, because then you're not being genuine of your intention to declare redundancy. You don't say, I'm intending to declare redundancies of these positions on this day. You say, my intention is to declare redundancies. We are going to take time to constructively understand the extent of these redundancies within the next 30 days, and we shall advise you later. So yes, the days need to be there, that you're saying within the next 30 days, we will advise you whether or not we will in fact declare a redundancy. But right now we are letting you know, hey, we have the intention to declare redundancy. Then it is in the second letter that actually you say, we have in fact ended up declaring redundancies to the following positions starting this day. So this second notice is the one that says, yes, on this day, the position of human resource coordinator will be declared redundant. The law says that the first notice should not be less than 30 days. However, if in your organization you have other provisions that are enhanced, meaning your organization says 35 days or 38 days or 45 days, then you go with the enhanced position. The law also says that the second notice must be a minimum of 30 days. But if you have enhanced provisions, you can continue with the enhanced position. All right, Josephine, we can take the next one.
Oh, sorry, I was speaking on mute. I'm saying I think Felicitas then agrees with you, because she's Felicitas, she or he says, if you say so, you sound more predetermined to declare the position redundant, which should not be the case. Follow the notice process, and those are my thoughts. Linda, thank you very much for your question. We are glad that we could respond that.
Very good thoughts expressed there also.
One last question on the Q&A. In the past, I've seen organizations declare redundancy when they want to demote an employee and reduce his or her salary. Is this legal?
No, it's not legal. And if you've ever joined any conversation with Wandy and also understand our whole motive within this organizational space is to just create better and inclusive job. That is a very, very destructive practice that should not actually be occurring. And on this one in CWW, we always say it very directly, that is illegal, it is immoral, and it shouldn't be done.
Awesome. All right, we continue to the next.
Alrighty, benefit calculation. So let me just take a recap again so that we are all following, right? Your redundancy occurs when there is involuntary loss of employment at the instigation of an employer through no fault of employee that then results in the loss of employment. Now, these redundancies then are to a position owing to business changes, either through economic downtime, strategic redesigns, and commercial redirections, and they follow set procedures in law. The set process number 1 is to issue notices. These notices are 2. The first notice is of the intent, goes to the Ministry of Labor, given at a minimum of 30 days. The same notice should be given to all the members of staff in that organization, and a copy sent to that trade union should there be a trade union in existence in the organization. This notice cannot be paid off, it has to be served. Then the second notice is now the substantial declaration of redundancy that goes to the Office of Labor, a copy to each and every individual that has been affected, and a copy to the Ministry of Labor. No, to the trade union, should you have trade unions in an organization. And then now, when this notice has been issued, it must be of a minimum of 30 days, and these 30 days can either be paid off or they can be stayed. Once this has been done, then you go into the consultative processes. The consultative processes, you can see they intermingle with step 1. Once you've issued your first notice, there is the consultations that occur before the substantive declaration of the redundancy. There is a room that is created for mitigation of the effects of redundancy to be done. And then finally, there's conversations that are held to the people that have actually been declared redundant. Then there is a selection criteria that has to be adopted, communicated to staff, and I've gone ahead to explain in those situations where you don't need a criteria, especially when it is only one position that's declared redundant and there's only one position holder in that position. Now we come into, you follow the processes. What benefits accrue to a person when they have been declared redundant? Now, employers are consistently encouraged to comply with the following. When I use the word encouraged to comply, I actually mean you should comply with the legal requirements on redundancy pay. What are those? It is very simple. You have to pay a notice of 30 days to that person that has been declared redundant owing to their position being declared redundant. There's a question that came in earlier in this conversation, and that had been missed in that particular area. So when you give this notice, the one, you remember I said the first notice it cannot be paid off. The second notice should be paid off. So it can be paid off by letting the person stay in the 30 days, then you pay them their regular salary, or you can give them notice you can pay them in lieu of staying. So the first thing is that 30-day minimum notice period has to be paid. If there is enhanced provisions within your regulations, or if you have a CBA or your HR manual says different, or employee contract says different, you go with the enhanced provision. You cannot, however, pay less than 30 days in terms of notice. The second pay is severance pay. Ladies and gentlemen, I need you to be very clear that the pay that is considered here is severance pay and not service pay. There is a clear difference legally between a service pay and a severance pay. A severance pay is only activated in the processes where a redundancy has occurred. No other circumstance calls for a severance pay in law, unless you have enhanced provisions in your organization that says different, but the minimum provision in law is that severance pay is actually activated only when a redundancy has been declared. The minimum provision is very simple, that you have to pay at the rate of 15 days of pay, at the rate of 15 days of pay for each and every completed year of service. That's what the law says. Therefore, it means that if you earn 30,000, and this I'm just doing rough mathematics, if you earn 30,000, split it into 15 days, that could be easily 15,000. And I'm just doing rough mathematics here, understanding very well that there are internal procedures that calculate what actually is a daily pay. So let's put that aside and just do it in the general understanding. You get your 15,000. So for every completed year of service, if I have worked for, say, 20 years, it is 15,000 times 20. That is the severance pay that you get. This is in addition to your 1 month pay. So you get your 30,000 for notice, then you get 15,000 times 20 for severance pay, then all the leave that you have accrued up until when you have finished your employment, including the notice period. So even if you pay off the notice period, the leave will still accrue, okay? So you pay the leave days up until that time, and any other monies that you are supposed to pay that is within your organization. So you find that there are some people, they have gratuitous payments. There is people that have other things that occur within the business that need to be paid. If you have pensions, then maybe you can ask somebody to either transfer their pension to another fund, or they can collect their 50% of employer and their 100%, or whatever it is your business says. Those are the legal minimums. Employers are encouraged to look, despite the fact that these are the legal minimums that I have spoken about. What have you said in your HR manual? What other policies exist in your organization? What have you promised contractually with your staff to deliver? You have to deliver that. If you have given an enhanced provision, ladies and gentlemen, you don't have the right then to say, yes, we said we will give a severance pay of 1 month's pay for every year worked, but we have checked and noticed that the law actually only requires us to pay 15 days, so we will pay 15 days. That is not how it works. If you have given an enhanced provision, you have to pay that enhanced provisions. If you're an organization that has a recognized union, that has a negotiated and functioning central bargaining agreement, these are the ones that are called CBA quite oftenly, you have to go and also read through it and see, do the unionized members of your organization actually get to be treated differently through that collective agreement that is explaining? Sorry, it's actually a collective bargaining agreement, not a central bargaining agreement. I don't know why I said that. This collective bargaining agreement that is in existence, does it give the members a better negotiated practice? Follow that practice. So what you're guided by is the simplicity of the fact that 1, these are the legal minimums. 2, my internal regulations are either in strict compliance with the legal minimums or they have given enhanced provision. And lastly, I have a collective bargaining agreement, and this collective bargaining agreement requires me to treat members of a trade union in a certain way. So you have to consistently comply with that. I don't know if I have any questions, Justin, before we go into the next slide.
Yeah, pretty much. Halima Salim is asking, can you revoke an employee benefits?
First things first, that has nothing to do with redundancy, and it's a totally different conversations that we're having. But through consent and conversation, salaries can be reduced because these are legal provisions. So there has to be consent that needs to go through the process before that is done. Benefits, on the other hand, are different things, and they can be discussed and understood in a different way. I don't want to bring that conversation into redundancies because those has nothing to do with redundancies, but in some circumstances, an employer is at their own discretion allowed to remove a benefit that is currently being given.
Okay. All right, Jennifer Kathuka, after the negotiations are over and your role is declared redundant, and by luck from the consultations ended up there was a different position available for the employee to fill, should you still be paid the redundancy package before you take on your new role in the same organization, or you continue on your new terms?
You continue on your new terms because you are not actually declared redundant. What happened is that there was an intention to declare you redundant, but you were not actually substantively declared redundant because through conversation, a mitigation was found and the mitigated circumstance prevailed where you were given another opportunity. So no, you will not be paid redundancy pay.
All right. And then Richard Magoma is asking, how should one deal with employers who rename the supposedly redundant positions after a few months?
Now, a position that has been declared redundant should not be rehired for 6 months. That's the law. A minimum of 6 months, those positions should always remain open. Business owners are encouraged to consistently to remain to be true. Don't use redundancies as a position to strengthen, as a thing used to strengthen your balance sheets. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not a good labor or a fair labor practice. If you're doing it, you need to be able to desist from going into that position. Legally, 6 months is the bare minimum through which a position can then be rehired. The question I understand from Richie is the simplicity of the fact that since I know that and I am trying to escape it, I go ahead and change the name of the position. And instead of calling it financial accountant, I call it senior financial accountant. Then I hire the person I wanted because I just didn't want Wandy in the role. That's a very illegal and immoral process to go through. Again, conversation with Wandy takes time to make sure that people are aware and they are fully connected with what it is they're doing. We are hoping that we can be able to get employers to practice the right thing and create better and inclusive jobs. That is why we do what we do currently for free, so that we can make sure that knowledge gap is not one of the reasons that put people in such kind of places. We have places that are available where you can raise complaints. You can always go to the Office of Labor. You can always go into, especially the Office of Labor, or go into a full litigation processes within the courts. So again, as an employer, you run a risk when you do that of being sued, and you actually are participating in an unfair labor practice.
All right, then, ladies and gentlemen, you're definitely in the right session and in the right conversation. And Fadzai Hundu is asking, can an employer cap accrued leave days to 21 days, or must an employer pay all the leave days accrued up to even 50 days to the LWD? And Melsa Masibo, I think, has answered that by saying all accrued leaves are to be paid. Do you agree, Wandy?
Absolutely. Once a leave has been accrued, that's all right. Unless you actually have a forfeiture process in your organization. But the thing that I have to say is that forfeiture is not a thing that has actually been fully recognized by law. Though they say that if you have 21 days of leave that have been given to an employee, they must take at least, I think it is 14 days within the first 18 months, and then the rest can be forfeited after 18 months of accrual of those days. So that means that a person can accrue leave days mainly up until 1.5 years after they have accrued those days before you start having conversations with them in terms of forfeiture. If you give more than 21 days, then the law allows you to get into an agreement. But the thing that I have to tell you very clearly here is, looking at many court decisions, the tendencies is never to enforce a forfeiture of leave. So if leave days have been accrued, they are right, they have to be paid. You cannot cap them.
Awesome. And then Linda Ngolo, given your example of 30K gross, how will you calculate for an employee who has 1.7 years? Is it prorated?
That is best practice. The law says, yes, that it's only for completed year of service, but most of the times court decisions have been very clear that you should prorate.
Okay. Caroline Derito, I have worked in organizations where years of service include the months above. Others use strictly the full years of service. For instance, if an employee has done 5 years, 8 months, the 8 months is not considered in the calculation, which is the correct position considering the law states completed years of service.
Yes, again, I've said the law says completed years of service, but we have to remember that in Kenya, it's not just what is written in law that is considered. Also, past decided cases are a thing that form part of the law. And if you follow many decided cases, they are stating very clearly that you should prorate. So when you don't prorate, you run the risk of somebody going to court and actually winning when it comes to matters proration. So best practice, prorate.
Right, and we want to do everything we can to avoid court cases. So Felicitas Obunga is saying, this is a comment to Fazal, a previous question on the leave days, and she's advising to develop leave policy to encourage people to utilize their leave days and reduce financial implication to your organization.
That is amazing advice right there.
Yeah. Jared Odindo is saying, is declaring of redundancies a better strategy in arresting downward business meltdown?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Had this been a webinar on how to improve businesses, we would have told you very clearly that cost minimization is actually not a strategy for business growth. Cost minimization is actually a stopgap measure, and it shouldn't be a measure that you're using in your business growth consistently.
All right, those are the questions we have at that point. So we can continue to the next slides, and given the time limitations, and I'm sure more questions will be coming in with the next slides, and we are concluding. And then we can take the rest of your questions after this slide. Wandy?
All righty, thank you very much, Josephine. So let me just take a full recap where we are at. One is a redundancy is to a position. Sorry, a redundancy is the involuntary termination of an employment through no fault of an employee at the instigation of an employer. A redundancy is to a position and not to a person. That the reasons behind a redundancy are mainly business change related. It could be commercial redirection, it could be strategy change, or economic downtimes through a certain set out processes that are given by law. If you have enhanced provisions, you can use them, but you always must follow the steps that have been listed by law. Step number 1 is to give a notice to the Ministry of Labor. This notice should be a minimum of 30 days. copy to all the staff in the organization, and a copy to a trade union, should you have a trade union. You're not allowed to pay off this notice. You can give more days if your internal regulations say the same. This is the letter of intention to declare redundancy. A second letter goes to the Ministry of Labor, to the people that have been affected by the redundancy, and a copy to the trade unions in the event that you have finally agreed that this is the redundancy that you have substantively declared. The second step is to consult. As you can see, as you can hear and infer, step 2 is mixed up in step 1. Once you're given the intention, you can substantively have conversations and consultations before declaring a substantive redundancy. Through those conversations, look into measures to mitigate the effects of the redundancy, and then go ahead and make sure that once you've declared the actual substantive redundancy, you talk and have consultations with the people that have been declared redundant in that particular area. The third step is to consistently then pick out and say without shadow of a doubt is, now this is the selection criteria that we have for the redundancies, and we've adopted it in this way, and this has a reason behind it, and then you communicate it to the same. A selection criteria is not needed when the position that has been declared redundant only has one position holder, so therefore you don't have to go through the process of selection. Remember the first in, last out principle. Remember, skill, reliability, and ability sometimes can come into play as you're looking at those particular issues. We've talked about the benefit calculations that come in after redundancy has been declared, and we've been very clear and setting the 1 month notice, the minimum of 15 days for every year of service, the days worked that have been given on that month, the leave days that have been earned, and any other monies that are available. Be sure to check and make sure that your internal regulations do not give a higher provision, and that the CBA, if you have an active CBA, that you have looked into that CBA and understood what it actually gives, should there be different provisions that have been given for purposes of the persons that have been unionized. So when you've gone through this process, what do you do next? Thing number 1, every person that has been declared redundant needs to be given a certificate of service. Never ever forget that, because once you don't give a certificate of service, you're actually not procedural, and your redundancy can be declared an unfair termination. So give a certificate of service. The second thing is inform the Ministry of the Office of Labor. Sorry, I'm very old school. I keep calling it the Ministry of Labor. So the Office of Labor is important for you to make this information to them and tell them the following persons have been declared redundant. This is according to our labor laws. Our Employment Act requires us to do that, and our National Employment Authority also asks us to give a list of the people that have been declared redundant. We need to be very clear that we need to deal with redundancy past legal requirements. That's why I spoke slightly on how you can be able to carry out a redundancy in a more humane manner than just, telling people this is a legal process, go ahead and do it. This is why Conversations with Wandy will consider to partner with an organization that has done this severally to actually take you through the process of understanding what it means to carry out a humane redundancy. This will be the conversation that we'll have next month in May, so that we make sure that redundancy is not the issue that causes people to walk deeper into mental health challenges. So we will be talking about that at length, and we invite each and every member that is here to join us in that conversation at that particular point. So ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of our presentation for now. We will take questions and see how best we can, work with each other to be better employers and employees where we are at. Josephine, do we have questions?
Presentation there, Wandy, and we have some more questions coming in. I think we have about 15 minutes to respond to these and to interact more. Someone is asking on the Q&A section, when an employee whose position is declared redundant while he was on leave, how do we go about it? Do we wait until he returns and issues the letter, and what should be his last working day?
I will refer you back to the notices that are required by law. 15 days, 30 days for the intent to declare, minimum of 30 days for the notice. So whether or not they are on leave, it's irrelevant. Have you paid the 30 days? That is what is the question. The other thing I would say to that particular question, I would really urge you to join us next month as we are talking about humane redundancies, because the question you're asking there, I feel that it's better answered other than in the legal terms, because there is a way you can handle a person who is on leave than just scaring them with a letter. in their inbox while they are probably doing their own personal issues, because you really don't know the person you're talking to, what it is they're going through at that particular point. I don't just want to wake up in the morning and click and see your position has been declared redundant. I would really, really urge you to join us and see how we can best work to have redundancies that are more human.
Right. Just to highlight that one of the biggest effects of redundancies, and especially as we have witnessed during the COVID-19, pandemic, is mental issues. And, these are maybe people who are breadwinners and, they were being relied on. And so it is a lot of conversation that needs to continue. And like Wandy said, we will have this conversation, including on the effects and the impacts on individuals, the organizations, as well as on their livelihoods. And when Angela Mwende Rani is asking, can you declare a position redundant 9 months down the road when you realize you don't need the position anymore?
Absolutely, because then that is a business re-strategizing.
Good. Jared Odindo is saying the law talks of staff utilizing annual leave days carried forward within the next 6 months, that is a business leave calendar year. If I'm not wrong, what then happens to an employee who unfortunately the employer mistakenly allowed to accumulate, let's say, 50 days when it comes to final dues preparation during the redundancy exercise?
When leave has been accumulated and has not been formally forfeited, these are accrued leave days that should be paid. Again, we said, when there is an enhanced provision, you go with the enhanced provision. The second item that I want to correct there is that it's not 6 months. It is actually 18 months from when the leave days were accrued. So please remember that it has to be 18 months where it is allowable for a forfeiture to occur. But a forfeiture cannot just occur by saying, go and read the law for yourself. You have to have a policy. I think somebody had said something like that earlier in the conversation. You have to have a policy that is clear, well understood by the staff for them to know that this occurs. If you're dealing with 21 days, be very careful about forfeiture. Forfeiture is better handled and looking at how past cases have been in court if you're dealing with more than 21 days. But please, the first step is to have a leave policy. Don't make an employee forfeit their days simply because you found a legal loophole. What happens here is that you have an enhanced provision that has been ongoing. If your performance in the organization, other than a person being declared redundant, if a person that left the organization and they had 64 leave days, you paid them off. You can't simply come and say, I've changed my mind right now and I don't want to pay them off, I'm going to forfeit. No, you have unintentionally created a better provision. You have to go ahead with a better provision.
All right. Otieno is asking, when you say inform the Labour Office, do the letters have to be stamped by the Labour Office?
Absolutely. They must be stamped, received.
All right. Caroline Derito, is there a legal guide on the calculation of leave days, since many organizations do it in different ways?
It's not very clear on the calculation, the actual calculation. However, what I will say is the simplicity of understanding what the law actually says. Leave days are not considered working days. So when you're calculating them just from that understanding, you cannot say a leave is divided by 30, because then you're talking about calendar days, yeah? Sorry, leave days are working days and not calendar days. So when you're going to calculate your leave daily amount, you can't say divide by 30 because the amount is actually paid on working days. However, there's no legal provision, legal clarity on that matter. But most of the time when you look at past decided cases, they have tended to say that you need to make the calculation based on working days and not calendar days.
All right. Linda Ngolo has a comment and a question as well. I must say that this was a very educative session. Looking forward to more. Thank you very much. And then she says, or she asks, unless I missed this, do you share final benefits calculation with the Labour Office? That is, I believe, after the declaration.
After the declaration of the redundancy? Not necessarily. You don't have to send that this has been the calculation that we have done, etc. Not really. You just have to go through the process and say these are the positions that were declared redundant. More often than not, you find that in the letter of the declaration of the redundancy, there is a mention that says you will be paid 50 severance pay, you'll be paid notice pay, your leave pay, your last till your day of work in compliance with Section 40 of the Employment Act and the internal regulations, or in compliance with the CBA, etc. It is unlikely that I have seen that the actual payslip is sent to the Ministry of Labor.
All right.
Sorry, the Office of Labor.
Office of Labor, yes. Old school there. Abdul Karim Ayuge is wondering if you can come up again on how to calculate the redundancy benefits. I think that was, it's a bit of an interest for many as well.
All righty then. So there's three things that are triggered when a redundancy is being calculated. The benefits of redundancy are being calculated. Number one is the notice pay. The notice pay has to be at a minimum of 30 days pay. So when you've been declared redundant, there is notice that is 30 days. So this notice is either paid or stayed. If it is paid in advance, you'll be paid the money in advance. If you stay, it will be paid to you at the end of the month, right? Then there is a severance pay. The severance pay is paid at a minimum of the rate of 15 days for every year of service that you've worked. That's why I use the general calculation of, say, you make 30,000 shillings a month. Roughly, we can say 15 days is 30 days. And this is a rough calculation. I'm not going into the actual details on how a daily pay is calculated, right? So we agree that the amount is 15 days. So it's 15,000. So that's 15,000 times the 20 years you've worked. This is your severance pay. Then you get paid all the leave days that you have accrued from the time you're in the organization, including that 1 month notice that you have been paid. Then you get paid all the days that you have worked currently in the organization. Those are the minimal payments. But you have to go back into your employment, into your internal regulations and or human resource manual to make sure that you don't have an enhanced provisions, because what I have mentioned here are the legal minimums. So if you have a better provision in your HR manual or internal regulations, this is then the process that will be adopted. If you have a collective bargaining agreement that treats people within the union differently, then that, and it is enhanced, this is what needs to be followed.
All right. Thank you, Margaret Mararo. You're saying this is a very insightful session. Many thanks to the organizers and Wandera for making the time. Asante sana. Jared is saying kindly fair case laws on leave for feature, having in mind that there exists a law of limitation.
Yes. Those days are in those forfeiture things are in existence, and we will be having a conversation on leave the month after May. I would advise you to join it, but there are quite a number of decided cases. But the basic principle is very simple. If you don't have a policy on forfeiture, don't go for forfeiture. That is the basic policy. And also, when you look at decided cases, they are very averse to forfeiture. Even in the status where there is a policy, you notice that they first put the process of the 18 months after accrual of the protected days, and then they can start talking about forfeiture. But this is a totally different and long conversation that I would actually invite you to join us and follow us so that you can have it constructively and fully.
All right, Nancy, you're saying thank you for such an informative session. Asante sana. And yes, we will share the presentation to your emails after the session. Otieno, you're saying, is there a difference between restructuring, redundancy, and laying off, or these are synonyms?
The thing is this: if there is an involuntary loss of employment at the instigation of the employer, at no fault of the employee, what you're doing is a redundancy. How you name it is entirely up to you, but what you're doing is a redundancy.
Very clear there. Jacqueline, thank you very much for saying very insightful and informative session. Yes, we will share the slides. Angela Mwendorani, on the follow-up question on declaring a position redundant, I did that and I followed the process. The Labour Office was informed. However, the person affected took us to court. What should be my best defense?
First, the right for a person to litigate on a process is not pegged on whether or not the person carrying out the process felt that it was fair. The person always has the right to litigate on a process. The statute of limitation, I think, is about 7 years. I'm not exactly sure on the date. So they have the right to do it even during, after, way after. So they can sue you even 7, I think. Let me say the statute of limitation is 3 years, but I could be wrong on that particular term. But then they have the right to sue you anytime within that time. You cannot stop them. What your best defense would be, I think you need to be able to read the complaint and understand what unfair labor practice is being referred to there and why they believe that this is indeed not even a redundancy, but an unfair termination. You might want to know what that is before you're able to respond.
All right, Angela, if you need more consultations with Conversations with Wandy, you can feel free to reach out to us via info@conversationswithwandy.org, and we will be able to help more. And Anekaya Aswa, you're saying thank you for organizing such an informative session. Asante sana. Elizabeth Mugo, for a staff who has 3 months notice in their contract, how do you go about this?
You pay 3 months notice, because you remember I said the law gives you a minimum, but if you have an enhanced provision, you go with the enhanced provision.
All right, thank you, Jane Bufia and Ann Nganga. You're saying such informative session. We appreciate your feedback. Asante sana. Nancy is asking, limitation of action 3 years for defamation matters, 6 years for contractual matters. I think that is in response to the question on the legal approach there. And then Jacqueline Kimaru, how can we reach Wandy? Once again, info, let me just type that out, info@conversationswithwandy.org. And remember, you can also respond to the email once we send you the presentation, and we can continue the conversation. One more question on the Q&A section, from Rose Lembi, when paying the redundancies pay, does it have to be done in the presence of labor office or organization advocate?
Absolutely not. I just keep saying, do the right thing, follow the right processes, and follow the structures that are within your organization when making the payments. What is important is that the person receiving this payment has understood how it was calculated and how it was arrived at, and that they have appended their signature to the fact that they have gone through the process of understanding this particular process. Issue a pay slip, because that is required, and follow through the processes of taxation as is required.
Thank you, Wandy, for that response. Elizabeth Mugo, this was such an informative session. Thank you very much. Be sure to follow us. Every last Friday of the month, our webinars are free, but should you need personal or one-on-one consultations, either at a personal level or at an organizational level, you can always reach out to us at info@conversationswithwandy.org. Lady Caroline, you're saying very enlightening session. Thank you, Wandy. Asante sana. Gordon Ramogi, you're saying this is a wonderful presentation. Asante sana. We shall be sending the slides to your emails after the session. On the Q&A, we have 2 minutes to respond. We are a voluntary early exit program. Can this be seen as a redundancy from Wandy's statement?
No. This is a mitigation to reduce the effect of a redundancy. It's not a redundancy. During the consultation, before a substantive redundancy is declared, you can actually come up with ways to mitigate the redundancy. One of the ways to mitigate the redundancy is a voluntary early retirement. They could be pay cuts. They could be repositioning the people in other places in the organization, but this is not a redundancy. These are mitigations to redundancy.
All right. I am being reminded by Wilkie Media that you are supposed to talk about redundancy due to medical condition.
There is nothing like a redundancy due to medical condition. This is a termination on medical grounds that is handled very differently. Remember, a redundancy only occurs. It's the involuntary termination of an employment at the instigation of an employer at no fault of the employee. A medical condition is considered something that was not really a fault of the employee. It's something that it's a reason other than business changes. So there is a laid out procedure on how termination can occur on medical grounds, but this is not a redundancy.
Great. I hope that we have responded to that, and I admit this has been exciting and very interactive. Thank you for your questions. I think what makes us more excited is we're not here to do the PPT or the PDF. What makes this more productive is the fact that you're able to ask your questions and we are able to clarify on the issues that affect you on a day-to-day basis. because our purpose, our vision is to enhance the HR narrative, one conversation at a time. And this is another successful conversation, and we are so excited to hold the coming ones. It's funny that the year is almost coming to the mid and time is passing by, but we hope by the end of the year, we will have achieved what we looked forward to at the beginning of this year. We are not worried about the time moving, but we are more excited that every month we have a chance to hold a conversation. Thank you for all your comments. There's one interesting one from Abdul Karim Mayugi. Is there a way one can earn CPD points through your webinars, especially IHRM members? I think Wandy, you can respond to
yes,
this on
what absolutely.
Abdi
Karim, absolutely. We are currently in the process of completing our registration with IHRM. We have submitted our content to them for consideration. If you're an IHRM member, you know that they just don't approve. So we are in the process of receiving these approvals, and we're hoping that by second phase of the year, we will be able to give CPD points.
Super. Most of you know that we officially launched, was it last month?
Yes, last month.
Yes, and we are very excited because we'll be expanding our services to you beyond the webinars. We will also be holding physical trainings, and there you will be able to earn your CPD points, and we are excited. We will share the information on your emails, and you're able to register and participate. Thank you very much. I did promise at the beginning of this webinar that we will keep time so that we let you go for the rest of your holiday, the long weekend. Thank you very, very, very much. We appreciate, and we are humbled by your presence. Asante sana, Wandy. Over to you for your last words.
I just want to thank each and every person for respecting us with their time. We thank you very much, and we hope to be able to keep SMARC on the time, because we take your time very seriously. We take your attendance very seriously, and thank you for the very many amazing questions. You can always visit www.conversationswithwandy.org. Maybe Josephine, you can type it there, and follow us on all our socials to get information on these particular issues. On our website, you can actually get a toolkit that will have this whole conversation that we have talked about in more detail with some certain even there's some case laws that are attached there. So you can always go read through that toolkit, and also there are other toolkits that are available. So always visit www.conversationswithwandy.org. Follow us on our socials. This webinar will be available also on our YouTube for any other day that you might want to listen to it. We look forward to hosting you again. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm sincerely humbled. I wish you a very happy and restful long weekend ahead. Asante.